Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. Hope you're having a great day. For today's story, we turn our attention to perhaps the most famous illegal alien who was deported, or definitely up there, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia had an order that prevented him from being deported to his home country, and he was. And the Trump administration has brought him back, which is what the Supreme Court also ordered him to do. So this is a lot like the case of JGC we covered the other day, where they brought JGC back because of the Supreme Court. And also now they brought back Mr. Garcia. They have indicted Mr. Garcia on various law, which I don't really care about for that part of the portion. If he's guilty of those crimes, then cool. Indict him, charge him, convict him, all that stuff is great. But for my money, the thing that's great is that he's back in the United States so that he can get due process. If that's putting him in prison, fine. If that's deporting him to his home country, that's fine. But either way, bring him back, bring him back. He has been brought back. So I remember a lot of chat, in particular, a lot of the haters in chat, a lot of the commenters in chat, like when I said, like, the Supreme Court said, like, bring him back, bring him back. It's like, well, that's not what the Supreme Court said. I'm like, well, they kind of did. And then they're like, well, Trump will never bring him back. You can't make him. And, well, Trump brought him back. So, that happened. So, okay. I mean, the Supreme Court said bring him back. He's been brought back. Great. So that's excellent. Cool. Now we can have justice done upon him. That's fantastic. All right. So let's read this article and then we'll read the indictment relating to this guy. They brought him back relating to this indictment. Well, at least that's their cover. I don't think they were looking to indict this guy inherently. I don't think that's really what they were really looking to do. But they found a basis by which they could give themselves political cover, which, again, I don't really give a shit about that, right? It's like they wouldn't have indicted this guy. They would have been happy to let him just sit in his prison in his home country indefinitely. I am quite sure. What do they care? But, they found a cover. So is he chargeable? Is he guilty? That's another problem for another day. But I think their real reasons was to give themselves legal cover. This is the real reason we're bringing him back, to face these charges. Sure it is. You just tried to find yourself an excuse, which is fine. In any event, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back in the United States after having been previously illegally deported and will now face criminal charges. The courts ordered the administration, again, the Supreme Court, along with JGC, to facilitate his return after he is deported to El Salvador in violation of a court order. Mr. Garcia, let me make this a little bit bigger. Mr. Garcia, the Salvadoran national whose deportation by the Trump administration was declared illegal by the U.S. Supreme Court. They sure did, and you can't see what I'm reading, so that's not helpful. And generated national furor, including from yours truly, because we didn't follow the rules, is back in U.S. custody and will face a human trafficking charge in Tennessee. I have no problem with him facing the human trafficking charge. If he's guilty of human trafficking, great. Put him in prison. Fine. If he broke the law, that's great. No problem. Rule of law. Kick ass. Let's go. Mr. Garcia was secretly indicted by the grand jury, as opposed to what? Politico. Secretly indicted. He was secretly indicted by the grand jury, as opposed to every other grand jury ever. They're all secret. Whatever. Abrego Garcia was secretly indicted by the federal grand jury in Nashville last month on 2 felony charges, transporting undocumented immigrants and conspiring with others to do so. And so at least 2 months ago, they were looking for an exit ramp on this thing. So they found one. The charges stem from a 2022 traffic stop in Tennessee when police found Mr. Garcia at the wheel of the SUV carrying 9 other men, all of whom were Hispanic and lacked identification, according to the indictment. Okay. The indictment was unsealed Friday after the Trump administration acknowledged that Mr. Garcia was in the custody of the United States. So he came back. Mr. Garcia's return followed months of extraordinary brinkmanship between the Trump administration and the courts. The Supreme Court, saying bring him back. Diplomatic intrigue, domestic political crisis over the issue. So yeah, they folded. Mr. Garcia, who allegedly entered the U.S. illegally more than a decade ago. There's nothing alleged about it, by the way, because there was a deportation order that was granted. It just said you couldn't be deported to his home country. So it's not so much alleged as true. Had been living in Maryland when the Trump administration arrested him, put him on the plane, and deposited him at the notorious Salvadoran prison on March 15th. Critically, the deportation violated a 2019 immigration court that barred the United States from sending him back to El Salvador in particular because he was risking being targeted by a local gang. So there was a deportation hearing. He was ordered deported, but there was a withholding of deportation relating to specifically El Salvador. So if the Trump administration had been able to get the agreement of some other country, then he could have been deported to that other country without a problem. But they did the one thing they weren't allowed to do, deporting him to El Salvador. They weren't allowed to do that. And they did that, and it was illegal. Now, it's of course been suggested many times that, he's MS-13, which maybe he is. It's been suggested that, his status should have been changed. Maybe it should be. I have no particular position on these issues. If that status was in some sense wrong, the Trump administration had every right to go back to the immigration court and get it changed. It's a withholding of status. They had every right to go back and get it changed, or do something else. So I don't know whether or not he's a member of MS-13. I don't know whether or not his status should be changed. All I know was that the order was still in place, and you can't defy a court order that's in place. So not so much. Mr. Garcia was secretly indicted by the grand jury last month on 2 felony charges. We covered that. Let's see. The Supreme Court and other judges said he was illegally denied due process. He was. And in court papers, the Justice Department acknowledged the deportation was an error, a position the administration soon renounced. But it was an error. It was clearly an error. The Supreme Court said so. U.S. Judge Paul Zinnes ordered the administration to facilitate his return, and then we had a huge debate over what exactly that meant. For months, the administration publicly resisted the order. Yeah, they had the Secretary of State going out there and be like, you can't force me to negotiate with El Salvador. You can't force me to negotiate. You can't make me do it. Yeah, they brought him back. At times, Trump and his top aides suggested Mr. Garcia would never return to the United States. The Homeland Security Secretary had said last month, there's no scenario when Mr. Garcia will be in the United States again. Well, apparently the Homeland Security Secretary either is lying or lacks imagination. Because as it turns out, there is a scenario where he's back in the United States, because he is. The Trump administration reversal comes with significant costs for Mr. Garcia. Federal criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. Again, no problem with any of that. If he's guilty, charge him, convict him, sentence him. All those things are fine. Mr. Garcia's attorney is quoted as saying, the government disappeared Garcia to a foreign prison in violation of court order. They sure did. Now, after months of delay and secrecy, they're bringing him back, not to correct the error, but prosecute him. Well, either way, he's back here. So, this shows they are playing games with the court all along. Due process means the chance to defend yourself before you're punished, not after. Well, they brought him back, and he'll get due process, I hope, at least for the criminal things. I hope he does get due process. And let justice be done. That'd be great. This case was assigned to United States District Judge Waverly Crenshaw, an Obama appointee confirmed 92-0 by the Supreme Court. Crenshaw was the presiding judge in a corruption case involving a Tennessee state senator who had recently been pardoned by Trump. The Trump administration insisted it had no power to compel El Salvador to return to Garcia. But in recent weeks, there were signs that officials had begun to engage with El Salvador's presence about bringing him back to the United States. Our government presented El Salvador with an arrest warrant, and they agreed to return him. It's all just cover. It's all just to save face. Not to say, again, that the charges aren't themselves legitimate in a legal sense. They may very well be legitimate in a legal sense. The reasons they're being brought, though, I am quite positive, are not because they just really wanted to prosecute this guy because they felt it in their bones. I'm pretty positive that this is all just legal cover. I don't really care if it makes them feel better. The goal has been accomplished. If it makes them feel better, then fine. And if he's guilty, then fine. In separate legal case involving another improperly deported immigrant, Homeland Security had revealed earlier this week that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had a longstanding personal relationship with the president and was using it to advance negotiations. But the administration also repeatedly refused to provide more details, invoking the state secret privilege, which the courts were also not really buying. It's unclear whether Mr. Garcia's return will have implications for other people deemed by the courts to have been properly deported. Again, we'd have to go look at their case and their specificity. So I can't speak to any of those cases because I haven't covered them. A federal judge in Maryland had ordered the administration to facilitate the return of Daniel L. Carmigo from El Salvador last month. I don't know the details about that. Early Friday, the administration declined to provide a substantive update regarding that, saying they were subject to high-level negotiations. The issue of erroneous deportations, let's call it that, exploded on Capitol Hill, where Democrats used it to underscore the extraordinary assertions of power and violations of due process underlying Trump's mass deportation policy. Again, I'm not trying to speak to all issues. I'm not trying to speak to whether or not there have been whether or not in some broad sense there have been illegalities relating to deportation. I can't possibly deal with that kind of issue. My view on this is fairly the same as it's always been. If you're here illegally, then you give them a hearing. It can be fairly cursory, deport them. It's fine. I can't speak to whether or not processes were followed in any particular case or not without getting into the details of the case. So I don't know, but I don't agree generally that I wouldn't agree with the Democrats that there's been systemic violations in like a global sense, although there may be cases that involve many people, but a lot of those people haven't been deported yet because their cases are ongoing. Some people, like Senator Holland of Maryland, made trips to El Salvador to attempt to meet with Garcia, while others were given an audience with senior Salvadoran officials and a tour of the prison. Yeah, the Democrats going there to try to meet with him was not exactly wise politically. I don't think that was not a good look. Let's go down there to meet with the guy. I'm not sure about that. The Senator Van Hollen said he welcomed the news of Garcia's return, saying it would vindicate his due process rights. Excellent. I agree with that. And that is sort of the end of that case. Oh no, there's a little bit more here. The administration will now have to make its case in the court of law as it should have all along. With respect to the criminal cases, yes. And with respect to the deportation order, then also yes, but slightly different. Prosecutors say that Mr. Garcia could face up to 10 years in prison for each documented immigrant, effectively a life sentence. I don't know about that. I'd have to get into it. However, defendants typically are sentenced under the guidelines, which usually call for sentences far shorter than maximum. That's probably true. Plus, they're all part of the same common criminal transaction because they were all found together at the same time, right? So typically, if they're part of the same transaction, they're sentenced as one crime, or they're all run concurrently. Yeah, but maybe there's some special law relating to human trafficking in the U.S. Code relating to this, but whatever. In a request for the federal court in Nashville to keep Mr. Garcia locked up pending trial, prosecutors leveled serious allegations against him, including he was a serial trafficker of undocumented immigrants who was involved in the abuse of children, and also accused him of being a member of the MS-13. Yeah, I have no particular problem with him being held on bail. He has a lot of incentive to flee, no particular ties. Holding him pending trial works for me. Miss Bondi, the Attorney General, says this was his full-time job. He was a smuggler of humans and children and women. Thousands of illegal aliens were smuggled. Okay, I think maybe she might be overshooting the moon a little bit. That perhaps she was. I mean, it might be true, but I'm a little suspect. It's a little suspect of that. The Trump administration is, a little sauce on some of the stuff, but they can prove their case, and it's fine. Mr. Garcia's lawyers said the allegations were spurious and should be treated with suspicion. Fair. Because of the Trump administration's effort to publicly assail Mr. Garcia's character through his detention. Until the new indictment, he had never been charged with a crime. Before his deportation, he had been a metal worker in Maryland and been living with his wife and children who are U.S. citizens. Mr. Mossenberg said they'll stop at nothing, even the most preposterous charges imaginable, just to avoid admitting they made a mistake, which is what everyone knows that happened. He's not going to be convicted of these crimes. Can't speak to that. There's no way a jury is going to see the evidence and agree sheet metal worker is the leader of an international MS-13 conspiracy. Well, he doesn't necessarily have to be the leader to be involved in a conspiracy. And of course, if he's involved in a conspiracy, then he basically eats everything, because that's how conspiracies work. Yes, Heartbreaker, I saw what they said. I read the article. It was in the article. I know that. They said that in the article. I read it already. Thank you. In court filings, prosecutors said Abigail Garcia transported approximately 50 undocumented aliens through the United States per month for several years. Okay. They also alleged that Mr. Garcia solicited nude photographs and viners of a minor. Okay. Mr. Garcia has now not charged with any crime related to CP. Bonnie attributes some of the allegations against Mr. Garcia to co-conspirators, which again doesn't really matter because conspiracy, he kind of eat it all. And now she does not currently face any charges beside the 2 counts to smuggling, which of course those charges could be added to at a later time. So, just enough to get you started, and then it could be augmented if needed, potentially with charges from other jurisdictions within the United States. Mr. Garcia's lawyer says they're making plans to meet with him. Mr. Mossenberg suggested criminal charges amount to a kind of retaliation for negative publicity. Yeah, I think that they are definitely trying to save face. I mean, that much is clear. The attorney said that Mr. Garcia's return could allow him to shed more light on the conditions at the jail, where he's held for a period and where more than 200 other men were deported. I posted the grand jury indictment. I already have a copy of the indictment. I'm going to bring that up as soon as I get done with the article, but thank you once again. I've got it covered. Bondi asserted Friday the Justice Department's intense scrutiny of Mr. Garcia had led to the breakup of a human smuggling ring he was allegedly involved in, although she did not announce any charges against anyone else, which makes it a little sus that that's a conspiracy, but we'll see. Mr. Garcia arrived in Nashville on Friday, according to ABC, where posted a photo of him being escorted out of a private terminal at the airport, scheduled to appear before a federal magistrate judge later that day. Okay, cool. All that good stuff. Let's take a look at the indictment. Let's take a look at the indictment in the Middle District of Tennessee and see what they're doing. This is federal court. Let's take a look at it. From around 2016 through around 2025, Mr. Garcia and others known and unknown to the grand jury conspired to bring undocumented aliens to the United States from countries such as Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Ecuador, and elsewhere, ultimately passing through Mexico before crossing to Texas. The co-conspirators knew the undocumented aliens did not possess authorization. Mr. Garcia and co-conspirators from El Salvador and other countries communicate with each other using cellular telephones and social media applications. Mr. Garcia and co-conspirators collected financial payments from undocumented aliens from transport in and through the United States. The co-conspirators then transferred money between one another in an effort to conceal the origin. The co-conspirators, and apparently they have 5 unnamed co-conspirators. So, all right, fine. Were co-conspirators with Mr. Garcia, all of whom were citizens of El Salvador, and all of whom are not U.S. citizens. Another co-conspirator was a citizen of Guatemala. Mr. Garcia was a citizen of El Salvador, not a U.S. citizen, was living in the United States. Mr. Garcia is a member and associates of MS-13. MS-13 is a criminal enterprise engaged in, among other things, acts and threats involving a whole bunch of illegal shit. Mr. Garcia, as detailed further below, used his status in MS-13 to further his criminal activity. Over the course of the conspiracy, the co-conspirators knowingly and unlawfully transported thousands of undocumented aliens who had no authority to be present in the United States, and many of whom were MS-13 members and associates. Okay. The co-conspirators also worked with transnational criminal organizations in Mexico to transport undocumented aliens throughout Mexico into the United States. Okay. That is very conclusory. I mean, there are no facts there. There's no specificity. Not that there needs to be. It just needs to be like, there doesn't need to be any like specificity in the indictment itself, but there is none. So they do not provide any specific facts relating to any of the crimes. So I don't know what they think they know or why they think they know it, but they are charging him with stuff. So anyway, we're charging him with conspiracy to transport animals, along with the co-conspirators 1 through 6, to transport and move aliens within the United States in violation of law for private financial gain, to cross the border without inspection, ordinarily picked up undocumented aliens in Houston, Holla, shortly after aliens had unlawfully crossed the border. Mr. Garcia and a co-conspirator then transported the aliens from Texas to other parts of the United States to further the aliens' unlawful presence. I'm not sure how they know any of those things, but okay. How does a conspiracy work? A conspiracy works by having an agreement between 2 or more people and an act in furtherance of the conspiracy to further the conspiracy. That's how a conspiracy works. And everyone in the conspiracy is guilty of anything anyone in the conspiracy does. So don't do conspiracies. During the course of a conspiracy, a co-conspirator was incarcerated for alien smuggling and was deported from the United States. During that period, co-conspirator number 2, at the direction of co-conspirator 1, began working with Mr. Garcia to transport undocumented aliens for profit. After the co-conspirator 1 was released from prison, deported, he illegally re-entered the United States and returned to work with Mr. Garcia, number 2, and other co-conspirators. In addition to transporting undocumented aliens, Mr. Garcia, co-conspirator 1 and 2, occasionally and simultaneously transported firearms illegally purchased in Texas. In addition to transporting undocumented aliens, firearms at times, Mr. Garcia occasionally and simultaneously transported undocumented aliens and narcotics from Texas and Maryland. On some occasions, members and associates of MS-13 accompanied Mr. Garcia on his trips. On various occasions throughout the conspiracy, the undocumented aliens, Mr. Garcia and his co-conspirators transport from Texas to other parts of the United States were MS-13 members and associates. Mr. Garcia and a co-conspirator regularly required undocumented aliens they transport to pay them for facilitation. MS-13 members and associates Mr. Garcia transport generally treated Mr. Garcia with respect and paid him for his services. Co-conspirators later transferred via Western Union and other means at least some of these monies derived from unlawful transportation to other co-conspirators. Co-conspirator 3, on multiple occasions with Garcia, transport undocumented aliens within the United States, also received and transferred payments from undocumented aliens derived from unlawful transportation further the conspiracy. Co-conspirator 4 and 5 received and transferred thousands of dollars of criminal proceeds derived from the conspiracy by wire, both within and outside the United States. Co-conspirator 1 also directed co-conspirator 6 and others known and unknown to transfer other money to others by wire for a fee to obscure the recipient. Also transferred criminal proceedings by wire to conspirator 4. In an effort to protect the operational security, Mr. Garcia, co-conspirator 1 and 2 varied their transportation routes. Mr. Garcia, conspirator 1 and 2 also routinely took the undocumented alien cellular phones they transported within the United States and provided them back to the undocumented aliens at the end of the trip. They did this to ensure they couldn't contact anyone during the trip. Mr. Garcia, co-conspirator 1 and 2 transported undocumented aliens in an unsafe manner. Yeah, probably. As part of the conspiracy, none of the undocumented aliens transported by Mr. Garcia carried luggage because they had just crossed the border. That's a very strange fact to put into the fact pattern. I'm not sure why it is particularly relevant that the undocumented aliens did or did not have luggage with them. Seems like a slightly strange fact to put into the fact pattern, but okay. To conceal their activity, Mr. Garcia, co-conspirator 1, 2 routinely devised and employed knowingly false cover stories to provide law enforcement that they were stopped. These false stories regularly involved transportation of individuals for work such as construction. In 2021, as part of co-conspirator 6 criminal activities in transport, co-conspirator 6 was involved in transport more of 150 migrants that ended when a tractor trailer carrying them overturned in Mexico, resulting in the death of more than 50 migrants and injuring many others. You might be able to get them for murder inside the United States then, if you can show them to be sufficiently tied. Mr. Garcia sometimes brought close relatives with him when he picked up undocumented aliens in Texas and transported them to other parts of the United States. On other occasions, he came alone. During some of the trips Mr. Garcia operated when he didn't bring a close relative, co-conspirator 6 received reports from undocumented aliens that Mr. Garcia had abused some of the female undocumented aliens. Knowing this was bad for business, co-conspirator 6 reported these allegations by Mr. Garcia to both 1 and 2, and 6 directed 1 and 2 to cause Mr. Garcia to stop the abuse. Can go to show intent to break the law. That they didn't have luggage? I'm not really buying it, but okay. Mr. Garcia, co-conspirator 1 and 2 routinely transport between 6 and 10 undocumented aliens per trip. Over the course of the conspiracy, Mr. Garcia transported undocumented aliens who entered the United States without occasion on approximately 100 trips. I'm not sure how they're documenting any of that. Mr. Garcia himself transported 100 times. I'm not sure how they're going to document any of that, but okay. On or about following dates, as a representative means of conspiracy, Mr. Garcia and co-conspirators took the following actions. On or about November the 30th of 2022, a state trooper with the Tennessee Highway Patrol conducted a traffic stop on a Chevrolet Suburban on Interstate 40. Other troopers subsequently responded to the stop. The stop was captured on video. Mr. Garcia was the driver of the Suburban. There were 9 additional passengers of the Suburban, all of whom were Hispanic, and none of whom had any identification. When asked where they were traveling from, Mr. Garcia knowingly and falsely told the state trooper he and the passengers were coming from St. Louis. He further knowingly and falsely stated to the state trooper Suburban passengers had been in St. Louis for 2 weeks during construction. Mr. Garcia also offered the passengers to were on their way back to Maryland. Well, if you pick them up in St. Louis and you're trying to get to Maryland, you know? Yeah. Mr. Garcia, which was false because he knew he picked them up in Texas. Both passengers told the troopers they were going to the same address in Maryland. The Suburban Mr. Garcia was driving had an aftermarket third row seats placed where the cargo area should be, which was occupied by passengers. None of them had any luggage, nor was there any tool or construction equipment. A license plate reader, which tracked the vehicle location, showed that he had not been in St. Louis in the past 12 months and, in fact, been in the Texas-Houston area within the week leading up to the traffic stop. Okay. Mr. Garcia had $1,400 in his pocket. Fine. Shortly after traffic stop, Mr. Garcia informed other members of the conspiracy he'd been stopped by law enforcement, but he'd been released. And then we had unlawful transport of undocumented aliens. Okay. In the Middle District of Tennessee, Mr. Garcia aided and abetted by others known and unknown, recklessly the fact that certain aliens had come to and remain in the United States. So basically, we're charging him only for the aliens that were basically part of this one traffic stop, basically, is what the only thing we're charging him for right now. So I suppose nothing else really matters because nothing else we're charging him for right now. But we're just charging him for the 9 undocumented aliens that were in the car when we stopped at this traffic stop in Tennessee. And if the government can show any of these other things to be true, then Mr. Garcia could be facing charges in other jurisdictions, I would imagine, within the United States. You know, so he could be facing charges in other places. Or, you know, the government could move to consolidate them all if they want to charge them. Of course, they have to indict first. So, excellent. So that basically is the end of that case for the moment. You know, I'm not really going to be following it. You know, I'm sort of over this case at this point. You know, I've accomplished my objective. My objective was to say that he was illegally deported, and he was. And my objective was to say the Supreme Court ordered him returned, and he's been returned. So this is the end of the story for me, right? Because he's back in the United States, and he will be charged and processed and possibly redeported using, you know, with revised hearing with immigration. And at that point, like, I'm no longer interested, because if he's, you know, deported following the process, then that's fine. If he's criminally convicted, that's fine. Right? This is all about rule of law for me, and always has been. And so the fact that he's back in the United States is sort of where I end the story. So I'm good. So, Mr. Garcia will face whatever charges he faces, and they can go from there. Yeah, which had been declared impossible. The Trump administration said it was impossible to return him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, guys, I guess I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. I've enjoyed our time together. I hope you did too. And we'll keep covering stories as they happen. So that's it. I've been on Civil Law. Hope all's well. Till later, my friends. Cheers for now. Goodbye.